بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, to him is all gratitude and peace and blessings on his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So those of you that are new to Medina or haven't attended as many gatherings that we've been doing in Ramadan yet, we started off this blessed month by talking about Revelation. We kind of then Ivana took us through the cave of Hira and solitude and knowing yourself and how that period was a period for the Prophet to know himself and know his Lord. And then Ruby touched upon knowing God by exploring the Meccan period. And today I'll be talking about Medina, and there's just so many aspects that you can touch upon Medina with this large theme. So I'll go into detail on what aspect I will be touching. But before that, we know that the Madinan period started off with Hijrah, which is pilgrimage. And symbolically, I want us to take that Hijrah by visiting hadith that Abad is going to share with us for our own inward Hijrah today. So if you don't mind sharing that hadith, Abad.
Okay, the hadith goes, certainly actions are by intentions, and every person will earn what he intended. So the one whose Hijrah was to Allah and His Messenger, then his Hijrah was to Allah and His Messenger. And the one to whose Hijrah was for the world to gain from it, or a woman to marry her, then his Hijrah was to that which he made Hijrah for.
So 3 things to notice about this hadith. The first one is that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he speaks about intentions, which is very much a hidden inward reality, he connects it to something that's very much related to physical movement, which is pilgrimage, Hijrah. And that implies that intentions is not just a passive act, it's more of a very exertional act. And it's a real struggle to keep our intention straight. You know, you guys can relate to that. So it's a real struggle to know that our intentions are purely for God. And then he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, mentions that the Hijrah to God and his he re-enunciates that the Hijrah is to God and His Messenger. He says it twice. And the third aspect to glean from this hadith is that Hijrah to worldly matters, that isn't even worth mentioning. So when he reinforces that the Hijrah towards God and His Messenger is the Hijrah towards God and His Messenger, in the last part of the hadith he says, well, for the worldly aspect of the Hijrah, you know, if his Hijrah was for the world to gain from it, or for a woman to marry her, then his Hijrah was to that thing, whatever he made Hijrah for. Indicating that is not even worth mentioning, and that obviously God and His Messenger is the loftier, like our journey should be towards that loftier aspect. So I want to kind of include a little bit of more of a exercise to this. So in the essence of this hadith, I wanted us to take a moment and just, if you can pass these around, a pen and a piece of paper, and for each of you to just write out your intention for tonight. Pick one intention and just write it out, and then we can all put it in the jar. And if we have time, we can read through them. If not, it's just something that you do for. All right. So continuing on, we'll continue to the topic. I hope this was at least a realigning exercise. That was the intention of it, just to realign our intentions for tonight. So when I was approaching the topic, like I said, I just felt like there was just an overwhelming richness to discussing Medina. You know, there's just so many things that you can talk about Medina and how you can talk about it. Oh, fresh mint leaves. And And, we can take it from a historical perspective, which I don't feel very equipped to do. But one perspective that I did want to touch upon, and I think it came from a personal point of view, given the fact that I'm in the field of neurology, I have an interest in the psychological sciences. So one thing that I wanted to address was the fact that in the time of Medina, the Majlis of the Prophet, there was just, in a sense, alayhi salatu wasalam, there was continuous reaffirmation of the importance of being highly emotionally intelligent people. And I'm not making this up. I mean, actually, there's a hadith that says, "Aqalun nasi arhamuhum." Like, the most intelligent of people are the most compassionate. And if that tells you that the Prophet didn't care about, I mean, that's the one hadith that would signify that emotional intelligence was just a prominent part of his teachings and of his majlis. So what is a majlis? I know I'm using a very Arabic term here. Most of you might know what that means, but essentially it means an assembly, and the definition of an assembly is a group of people gathered together in one place for a common purpose. And, in the prophetic community, that essential common purpose was the oneness of God, Tawheed. And it was continuing that journey within, knowing God, like during the Meccan period, and taking it beyond to actually establishing and knowing God within the community in Medina. So there are three key things that I've gleaned upon from listening to several lectures. One, that in his majlis he emphasized hilm, and I'll go into what that means, but one of my favorite translations of that term, that Arabic term, is empathy. The other thing is he tried to anchor the idea of affinity, or ta'lif is the Arabic word for that. And the third is his majlis was, like, after the companions left his majlis, they left as guides. So that concept of being guides. So like I said, the fact that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a highly emotionally intelligent being, and his presence was that of healing and of expansion. I want to first touch upon what he was healing during that time, like within Medina and even in Mecca. And the term, you guys are familiar with the term jahiliyyah, right? And what is it most often translated as? Ignorance, yeah. Another translation for that term would be would be a translation that's akin to anger. So if you say ana jahilt fulan, meaning that you almost like you lost it with that person. And another kind of extraction of that term, and I don't remember the exact Arabic word, is to boil over. So it was a time of like boiling over, of seething anger, of people that were just following their whims or their like inner passions, and kind of that was the motivating factor to a lot of their actions. So he came as a healer of anger. And in our time, oh my, it is a time of anger. I mean, there is bloodshed everywhere. We are surrounded by such tremendous amount of, or such lack of beauty in our world. We live in very, as one person mentioned, like a very concrete jungle. And there's that loss of beauty and lack of beauty that keeps us in this almost angry, fiery state. So he came as a healer of anger. And he taught his people to distinguish between dissent. And what I mean by dissent is that, you become angry because something moves you, right? And so you respond to it in a sense. And that can either motivate you towards a positive action, or it can take you down the route of like a negative, seething, demonic nature. So he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, realigned that anger so that it is a flame that reminded us of the need to act, but it was never the motivator for the act, and it was never the justification for the act. And so he taught us to respond with passion to human error, but maintain that certainty with God. And while doing that, be absolutely uninterested in our own bruised egos. Like, while we are responding to this thing that is causing us to feel very emotionally moved, our mode of action should not be one that is motivated by our own ego, in a sense. So who has shared suffering? Who's reading that one? Is it you? Okay. Can you read that hadith? Yeah.
Abu Talha, Sayyidina Abu Talha reports, we claim to God's messenger of hunger, complained to God's messenger of hunger. And we lifted our robes to show him that every one of us was tying a stone over his belly. The Prophet ﷺ lifted his robe, and we saw that he had tied 2 stones over his belly.
So I think what you can glean from this hadith is that he wasn't only a witness to the people suffering, but he was a sharer of their suffering. And in our world today, a lot of us are witnesses to a lot of the suffering, but very unlikely are we really sharers in that suffering. And I think part of it is we are too afraid to sacrifice our material comforts. That's one aspect. Like, imagine a community, like if we were able to, in this community, intentionally live in the heart of the struggle of our community, like in the inner city, for example, and how transformative that would be for us first, before those people. And it also reminded me of the story of, you met him, Sami and Adler. You know, the boy, the 4 and 6-year-old boys that were at our table at this refugee dinner, and they were Caucasian. They were not refugees, actually. So their father seats them there, and, you know, I just thought I would, you know, strike a conversation with them just to get a sense of why they were there at that dinner. And these 2 siblings shared how transformative this experience was for them to host a family, a Syrian refugee family, for a whole week. And why aren't more of us doing that? You know, that's what really came through my mind. Like, you know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, whenever he saw someone of another faith do something that was good, he was always constantly saying, "Nahnu awla bih," like we. If Ahmed, can you translate that better?
We're more worthy of it.
Yeah, we are more worthy of that act. So his healing presence was strongly related to the fact that he shared that suffering with his people. So the other aspect that he did very much emphasize during his majlis, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was empathy. And does anyone remember who was the woman, the blessed woman that nursed the Prophet, what her name was? Halima, yeah. And what is that name related to in Arabic? Yeah, hilm. So that concept of hilm, which is often translated as what? Forbearance, yeah. So, and forbearance means to restrain oneself and to show tolerance. But quite honestly, like if you look at that word and what it's connected to another, like if you flip the last 2 letters, it becomes himl, which means burden. And also if you look at another translation of that meaning, hilm also means vision, or having a dream. And I think forbearance or tolerance or restraint is limiting the meaning of that word, because truly to be of hilm means to carry a burden of another person to be able to envision their burden. That's empathy. And so he was an empathic visionary who carried and continues to carry the greatest burden with us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who has empathy? Can someone share what the Prophet peace be upon him?
That's me.
Yeah.
I don't have empathy. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, was constantly on the lookout for others' needs. Only that, meaning their needs, was discussed in his majlis. He said, "Those people who cannot put forth their needs to me, you should inform me about their need."
So that was the key thing that he reinforced in his majlis, like taking care of people's needs. And can anyone share with me what you think those needs might have been?
I imagine they ranged the gamut. So some of them were probably more physical and practical, and some of them were more emotional, and some of them more spiritual. So people probably came in for absolutely everything.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I have written: physical, emotional, spiritual, in that order. In that order. So yeah, physical in the sense he shared with them that suffering to begin with, and he made sure that they were fully physically fulfilled before he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Emotional needs, like the time Ja'far radiallahu anhu became a martyr and he came to Asma and tears were in his eyes to deliver the news, and he took care of her kids in that moment. Spiritual needs, giving the guidance that is best suited for that person. So if it's someone that came from the outlying areas of the desert who had very different mind frame or understanding, he would approach them with that understanding. So his presence was one that would, and his empathy was one that where he would transform himself in a way that would be receivable by the other person. So, okay. And the other thing is, one of his strategic visions was channeling people's needs so that everyone in Medina understood how their role fit into that greater global Medina vision. And that's why the stories of the companions are diversely different. Like you might connect really well with one companion story and elements of his story, and maybe to a lesser degree another, just because of how diversely different they were and how their role in that global vision that he had was fit into the puzzle. And the other thing about addressing people's needs, I heard this from a lecture by Sheikh Abdullah al-Adhami, where he mentioned that in the realm of adab, and adab, I guess one definition for it is etiquette, or as I think Ahmed mentioned one time, putting things in the proper place, that there's two kinds of zakah, or two kinds of purification. We know one kind, like the zakah from your wealth, the 2.5%. But then there is the zakah or the purification on behalf of your dignity, and that is the zakah of it's to advocate, to intercede, and to be beneficial of others, and that's how you give zakah on your own dignity. Okay. And then the next I wanted to share about realignment. Who has that one? How his empathic healing led to, go ahead.
Our beloved sent us on a mission, and he saw that we were exhausted, and he used his hands. O God, do not make them reliant on me, lest I weaken in serving them, and do not relegate them to themselves, lest they become feeble.
Okay. What do you think he was doing there? So they were on a mission. They were visibly very exhausted, and with the understanding these are people that had stone wrapped on their belly. So exhaustion to them must have been something significant at that point. So they were exhausted, and he recognized that, he connected with that, and then he raised his hands and said, God, do not make them reliant upon me, lest I weaken in serving them. Do not relegate them to themselves, lest they become feeble. What do you think he was trying to touch upon or do in that moment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. So the companions were very visibly exhausted on this mission.
Right.
And they were looking to him. And he recognized that. And in response, he raised his hand and made this dua that, oh God, don't make them reliant upon me. Don't let them rely on me. And don't let them rely on themselves.
So what's the question?
So what was the lesson there?
You should go to the Most High. You should rely on the Most High.
Exactly. So reliance on God. And he recognized a need in them, right? And he connected with that very deeply. But he realigned them to take their needs towards God. So,
Hala, would you like to share with the group the dua regarding that?
dua?
Allahumma la takilni.
No, go ahead.
There's a dua that the Prophet ﷺ used to make. He He said, "Wallah la takilni ila nafsi, wa la ila ahadin min khalqika tarfata ayn." Allah, do not leave me to the care of someone other than you, or even myself, for less than a blink. Yeah, and the Prophet ﷺ used to make this regularly.
Right. So the emphasis is, taking your needs to God first before people. Okay. So am I going too fast? Okay. All right. So the next aspect that he did reinforce, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was ta'lif, so the concept of affinity. And who has that with them? You do.
I think it was some mechanic.
She's a repertoire of affinity. No, just go ahead.
He, peace be upon him, brought them together and didn't cause alienation. He said, there is no God in this. There is no good in the one who is neither able to inspire affinity, nor is he able to feel affinity towards others. So I read it again.
I know, that's affinity right there. There you go.
That's proof of your affinity.
I think it has been read.
Wow.
Mashallah.
Do you mind if I hear it one more time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Repeat that.
Thanks.
He, peace be upon him, brought them together and didn't cause alienation. He said, there is no good in the one who is neither able to inspire affinity, nor is he able to feel affinity towards others.
And the Arabic, for those that want the Arabic, وَيُوَالِفُهُمْ وَلَا يُنَافِرُهُمْ. So he brought them together and he did not cause alienation between them. And another narration he mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-mu'min ma'lafa, that the believer is a repertoire of affinity, that he is about bringing together, harmonizing, about this idea of ulfa, of togetherness. And the other thing he continuously reaffirmed was, he kept saying, وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا, do not be agents of alienation, of repelling others. So he'd say, سَكِّنُوا وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا, like, be a calming presence, don't alienate. بَشِّرُوا وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا, like, bring hope to people, do not alienate. And then عَلِّمُوا وَلَا تُنَفِّرُوا, again, teach people, give them guidance, and don't alienate. So it was something that he continuously repeated. And then, the ayah that mentions, remember God's ni'mah, God's bounty on you. You were before enemies and He brought you together. That He caused that affinity between you. And one of the hadiths that are like in the history, in the tradition, in the narrative tradition, one of the first hadiths that are taught are Ar-Rahimuna Yarhamuhum Ar-Rahman. That the merciful people, God's mercy, the most merciful, will bring upon them mercy. And so that kind of affirmation again of that ayah that I remember, I think it was Shifa had shared from Surah Al-An'am, that says, when those come to you, those who believe in our signs, greet them with peace and relate to them that Allah has written upon Himself mercy, or as I like to translate it, compassion. So that was the first lesson. Like when you meet someone, the first lesson should be to them that God wrote upon Himself compassion. So, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that was his teaching. And then, lastly, this idea of that He set them out to be guides. And I want to, whoever has guides, to read that next. Oh, go ahead, Sahar.
Alright. They come into His majlis as seekers, and none of them leave except that they had something to taste, and leave His assembly as guides.
Okay. So the idea that they come into this assembly as seekers, like they're thirsty for something. يدخلون روادا ولا يفترقون إلا عن ذواق ويخرجون أدلاء على الخير is the Arabic. So they come in very, very thirsty, seeking for something that would fill them. And they get a taste of it. And they do not leave that majlis except, it's almost that it's saying that they have this determination to go out and expand on the taste that they have received. It's something that has transformed their being, and they want to further transform their community and their surroundings with it. And the idea of guides, what does that, I'm still trying to actually navigate it. I don't have any answers, so I'm actually, this is a genuine question. What does the idea of being a guide, how does that speak to you? What do you think of that concept of being guides? Was that different?
I think it relates to how you're saying when you've tasted and there's something transformative of that tasting, then there is almost a natural inclination or a translation to others that behold you. Mm-hmm. That you yourself emanate that because you tasted it purely. Like it's, to me, that's kind of what it seems to touch upon.
That's beautiful. Anyone else?
I think I absolutely feel that. And one other thought, just like on different aspects perhaps of what I think of when I think of that word, is when I think of a guide, I think of also the difference in someone who's telling you where to go. Like a guide is actually on a journey with you. Like they're actually like walking with you, and as you're going, they're showing you where to go because they've been there before, they know it or they've seen it. But it's not that they're like one of the words that things distinct about that word for me is that they're not telling you, they're not giving you a map, they're not doing any of that. They're with you.
That's amazing. I'm glad I opened the floor. Who else?
The word in Arabic.
Adillah.
It's like really Huda's guidance. And I think that's the best definition I've ever heard in terms of what guidance is. Because Allah's with you on the path, right? He's not some divorced deity. But like the roots, hedi is what is sacrifice, right?
Right.
And then hadiya is like gift. So it's like someone that is constantly a gift in every part of your life, but also to be a guide, you have to be full enough to sacrifice yourself for those around you. So that, like a selflessness that comes with being a
with being a guide. It's beautiful. Any other thoughts? Anyone care to share? No? Okay. Yeah. So, and I think this speaks upon that, like Islam, and we've had this discussion back and forth. I remember on the Medina WhatsApp about the idea of dawah, and we touched upon how Islam is about energy and about presence and about showing rather than having to call to something, in the sense that it's not something that you need to constantly show people proof, but rather your actions and your demeanor and your presence is proof enough. And you know, the Quran says, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and thoughtful reminders. And that's where the aspect of the wisdom comes in. There's just so many different ways to call to God and to approach different people. And the important thing to remember is that the idea of dawah that we have in our day-to-day, the systematic dawah that we have, didn't really truly happen in the time of the Prophet. The only time he had actual people teach the religion to, in that way, in that approach of, like by speaking, is when people showed interest in Islam, and he sent like Mus'ab ibn Umair to teach them about Islam. And that we're supposed to be this kind, anchoring, powerful presence. You don't have to call to anything, you just have to present it. And the companions were just very, very busy living, too busy exploring, wondering, and inspiring the life out of everyone, that they didn't, I mean, it naturally happened that people were interested and were gravitated to it. And I think it also, like Amanda mentioned, how a guide is constantly with you on that journey, and how that implies like movement. And there's, I'm trying to reinforce that because we do get into this like lecture sitting mode about learning about the deen, but there's a bigger and better way to truly experience our religion and to learn from others, and that's through actual experiential understanding and learning. And so I want whoever has the next one, Adab, to share that. Rana. Yeah.
I accompanied Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he only shared one hadith. Everything I learned from him was from his adab.
Mm-hmm. So again, that even the companion, so who was talking there was one of the tabi'een. He had mentioned that he accompanied Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who was a companion, and who was obviously transformed by the Prophet, peace be upon him. And he wanted to learn something from him. He was eager to learn, and he wanted to hear more about the Prophet and what the Prophet said, but he gave him just one single hadith, and it was his way of being that actually transformed him and that anchored for him the truth about this religion. And I chose that because it would be bad adab on our part if we've gotten like the slightest inkling taste of this religion and we were not in movement. We were not constantly working to internalize Islam, as opposed to, you know, just have Islamic in front of everything in our lives. So that's essentially the three core things that I wanted to touch upon. And like just to wrap it up, I was going to share a few things that, you know, came to mind as I was preparing this. So the first one is that he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that his essence was gentleness, and the fact that gentleness yields to reality, it yields to what is, and to the imperfections of life. And it's the opposite of everything that's pretentious, that's impatient. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam came like in Mecca and Medina. He was dealing with what is and not what should be. And I think this is one of the main things that I learned from listening to Sheikh Abdullah al-Adhami, is how he mentioned that the Arabic word for ideal that we have, mithali, is a modern day word. And that in reality, like, and we think of the Arabic language as a divine language. So everything that we can learn from it has like a divine essence and a divine source to it. The fact that that word does not even exist in our sacred language means that dealing, like, our reality and our existence in today's world is about dealing with what is currently, as opposed to a set ideal or a set expectation of what should be. And it's not beneficial to speak about a truth that cannot be implemented. And the second aspect was the idea of the prophetic inheritance. A lot of times, what is the prophetic inheritance? Does anyone care to share? Like, the Prophet didn't leave any material inheritance, but... So knowledge was his prophetic inheritance. And for knowledge to be truly prophetic, it has to be transformative. And so the only knowledge that is truly... I'm saying the same thing over and over again. But so essentially what I'm trying to say is that knowledge can come in many forms. It can come in the form of me speaking to you today, but it also can come from an experience with someone that just changes you and transforms you. So knowledge through deeds, through actions of people that can speak volumes, like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And that's where teaching your faith by deed is far more important, and it will serve you and others greater than any eloquent speech that anyone can deliver. And then I wanted to end with this, because we were talking about empathy and shared suffering, and all of us, you know, within our lives, we're going through elements of that. And recognizing, I think this connects to the point that Arshan touched on the other day about possibilities. That, you know, finally when your heart breaks, when your heart breaks is when it finally opens, and it opens to possibilities, inshallah.